Welcome everyone to the Ringling. My name is Katie Nickel. I'm our head of educational programs, and it is an extreme pleasure to welcome you all here this morning for a very special Viewpoint Lecture with artist June Clark. I'm going to start off with a brief land acknowledgement, and then we're going to go ahead and kick off the program. The Ringling acknowledges that its campus and grounds are located on the ancestral and traditional homelands of the Seminole Tribe of Florida, the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida, and the ancient Calusa, Uzita, and Tocobaga peoples. We pay respect to the resiliency of their tribal members, past and present, and to all indigenous peoples. The Ringling and Florida State University honor its friendship with the Seminole Tribe of Florida, together paying tribute to the tribe's great history and rich culture. We encourage all to learn about the significance of indigenous peoples in this region and throughout the United States. And I should also mention right at the beginning that I am so sorry about the issue with the percolator. It sounds like we're having a couple of technical issues here, but I do think that June is going to wake us all up. And as she is speaking, I am going to sort that out for all of us. Just a few housekeeping items as we get going. June's lecture will be followed by a period of question and answer. So if you have questions, hang on to them until the end, and we'd love to hear them. There are restrooms located here on the third floor of the Center for Asian Art. If you exit the lecture hall, they are catty corner and across the lobby here on the same floor. There is water located at the back of the room, and there are emergency exits up to the front and to the left of the screen. And now, without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce my colleague, Olaf Lusek, the Keith D. and Linda L. Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art.
Thank you, Katie. So thank you again for the introduction. I would like to thank Katie's entire education department for making June's talk possible and for bringing all of us here together. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. But before introducing our amazing, generous, brilliant, one-of-a-kind guest of honor, June Clark, I also wanted to welcome Daniel Faria. Daniel, do you mind waving to everyone? Daniel Faria of the Daniel Faria Gallery in Toronto. The Ringling worked closely with Daniel and his team on bringing June's work to the museum. Daniel is one of the most ambitious and caring gallerists in Canada, a longtime champion of underrepresented brilliant artists like June and varied art forms. He goes above and beyond to bring the work of the artists he represents to a global audience through numerous exhibitions, art fairs, and institutional partnerships. And the reason why I'm saying all of this is not only because he's incredibly brilliant, but also to give a little bit of a context and background on how I came across June's practice. It was about 2 years ago at Art Basel Miami Beach. Just over a year ago? Oh my goodness. Where Daniel had a booth at the main fair with June's work. And that's how I first came across her work, but only a portion of Harlem Quilt was installed then. However, the piece, I noticed that it was glowing from afar. When I first walked up closer, just the warmth of the fabric surfaces, the black and white images of people and street life revealed themselves to me. And I knew then, and of course after learning more about this amazing artwork from Daniel, that behind the documentary approach to making pictures and a unique way of assembling a quilt, there's a deeply personal and raw story that expands onto a universal experience and really reaches beyond the personal into a collective consciousness. And I believe that June's work has the power to touch all of us. The exhibition Harlem Quilt at the Ringling is the first presentation of the work at a US museum since its unveiling at the Studio Museum in New York City, Harlem, in 1997. Works by Clark on canvas and paper, ranging from 1994 to 2002, are also presented in this exhibition here at the Ringling to really offer a deeper engagement with issues affecting Black communities in Canada and the United States, and just to really understand and allow for a broader understanding of Clark's oeuvre as a record of social history. So June's material practice, spans many decades and many different mediums. She is gracing us with her presence today to generously share insights into not only the work on view at this museum, but also to share stories about her life experiences in Harlem and then Toronto, and how they shaped and fueled her practice as an artist. So today it is my pleasure and honor to welcome June Clark to the Ringling. June has earned national and international recognition of her photo-based image works, installations, and interventions. She has had solo exhibitions at numerous major art institutions, such as the Art Gallery of Ontario in Toronto, the Studio Museum in Harlem, New York, the Koffler Gallery in Toronto, as well as Mercer Union. Her work has been included in exhibitions at the Art Gallery of Ontario and Textile Museum, both in Toronto, the National Gallery of Canada, Agnes Bay in Paris, and Linda Kirkland Gallery in New York. She has completed residencies at the Studio Museum in Harlem and the Ontario College of Art and Design in Toronto, among many others. And she's found in important collections of public art institutions internationally. Harlem Quilt, her solo exhibition at the Ringling, is on view in the Monda Gallery for Contemporary Art until March 26th, so please go and see it before it comes down. And today, June will take the stage, and then at the end, I will join her in a very brief conversation, but really this is about your opportunity to ask June questions directly. And now please help me in welcoming June Clark.
Thank you, Ola, and thank you, Ringling, and thank all of you for coming and spending the morning with me. I'm going to begin right away. The beginning is to let you know why we're all here and how we all got here together today, okay? This is a portrait of my parents on their wedding day. And that's my dad, and I'm sure you all will say you had the greatest dad, but I really didn't. He was amazing. He was quiet and gentle and just so wise. And my mom. Oh, my mom. This is very exciting. Anyone who grew up in New York, I just found this image. In the 40s, New York undertook to photograph every building in the city for tax purposes. And that was our building, 2191. And the first floor, these two windows, belonged to my grandparents. And we, as a family, lived on the same floor, but in the back apartment. And Joe's Market, I was so excited because Joe's Market, that's where my grandmother sent me often to buy things, okay? And it was run by Joe, his son Jerry, and his brother Bob. And my grandmother, I'm a little kid, right? So my grandmother tells me, go down, get whatever. It's a butcher shop, it's a market. Go down, get whatever, but don't let Bob wait on you. I have no idea why. I don't know if he gave her shoulder instead of loin. He never told me, but no, I couldn't wait. Okay, again, I'm a little kid. So of course, the day comes when I go down there, and Bob's the only one there. He's the only one who is not busy. So he says, yeah, what do you want? And I stand there, right? I don't know. She says don't let him wait on you, but she doesn't tell me what to do if he's there. So I wait until Jerry or Joe and whatnot, and as an adult, I am positive he went home and told his wife there's a kid on the block that is dumb as a rock. I mean, she never told me plan B, right? Anyway, and so this was between 118th Street and 119th Street. On our street, there were Chinese families, there were West Indian families, Eastern European families. At the end of the street, there was a woman from Ethiopia who taught piano. We had everyone on the street. And just beyond Joe, Mr. Farrell had a candy store and ice cream store, and if you, I don't know, ice cream used to come in big buckets like that, and they'd scoop it out, and you'd be very lucky if you were waiting outside when the bucket was almost empty. He'd call you in and give you a spoon. My church was on 120th Street. I'm telling you all of this just because that's where we get to the Harlem Quilt later on, but my church was on 120th Street. My school was on 117th Street. And this is the first grade. Probably can't find me, but I'm the one over here. Right there. Trying to figure it all out and wonder what's going on. And I had such a, you'll have to forgive me. And this, my parents, after they had the three of us, he really, really, really wanted a boy, but not girls. But he was great. And that's me again. And I'm also showing you these because I use these images over and over again with prints and collage or whatever, because they just keep coming with me in terms of jogging my memory about things that I went to. And this is the family, that's my great-grandmother sitting in the center. So how lucky am I to know my great-grandmother until I guess I was about 12 and when she died. And that's me again. I was starting to get a bit cheeky. And my mother did the photograph, and I'm certain she was so busy trying to figure out and make sure everyone was in and smiling that had she noticed, she would have told me, take your hand down. But again, this is another one image that I use, and the text to this image, when I made it into a print, is Grandma said, and she actually did say this, Grandma said, when you choose your husband, think of what your children will look like. Again, that's me sitting next to the principal. I begged my mother that I wear my hair out that day for the photograph. This is my elementary school. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience for me. I had all female, of course, female teachers. They were Jewish and Italian. Okay, now you're thinking the end of the 40s, the beginning of the 50s. Think about these women and what they had just gone through. even if they hadn't been over there, they had family, they had whatever. I was taught thirst for learning, thirst for books. I learned of all the composers to the point that we all had ditties to remember the composers, Prokofiev and Saint-Saëns and Granger and all of that. I had a really rich education. And as I say, a love of learning and a love of books. My son, who's about 53 now, continues to tell me that I never allowed them to put books on the floor. I just had that reverence for books because I learned about book burning in elementary school. So that was very important for me. And this, when you think I lived on 8th Avenue, 118th Street, 119th Street, that was my village, okay? People, everyone on the block was a parent. They took care of me. They took care of all of the kids on the street. They could reprimand us. And if we were not good, our parents would hear of it. So it was a warm and wonderful place to grow up. I get to be 17, I graduate, I have to go downtown for work, and I'm surprised when people say, oh, how it must have been so horrible for you to live up there. How do you do it? So when says check your perspective. Most often when I'm doing work, I'm not trying to talk to you, I'm trying to talk to myself, figure things out. Because I couldn't put together this fear that people had for where I grew up and what I was experiencing, the warmth of all of the people around me. And that was the first time everything shifted. I couldn't understand and put these two pictures together of how many people were afraid of where I lived. And it was, sorry. This was done in, when I had a residency in Paris for a year. And this is the Sergeant Bartman. She was a South African huge woman that was put on display by people who had freak shows and things like that. And I didn't know very much about her, but when I was in Paris, I'm sure I read an article and I couldn't understand, and I tried to connect with her and hearing the way she lived and what she had to go through being on display constantly. And there was an image of her, and I just kept printing the image on a piece of paper until I ran out of ink. I just needed to, a lot of my work is meditative, and I needed to just get that out of my system and try, as I say, to connect with her as well as say, I've seen you, and I know that you've been a witness to some pretty awful things. Yes. And this is called because it's the kind of thing that at home, you ask a stupid question and my sister or someone would say, So when I saw this image, I saw this when it was first done, and again, check your perspective. It just didn't make sense to me. So recently, I I found it again and cut it out, and I just sat down and began typing. All of the people who would think, that's ridiculous. I mean, we would never, ever think that we would prefer. I mean, look, I've done dancers and singers and astronauts and bell hooks and James Baldwin and Eartha Kitt and all of the people who just got on with their lives and not thinking that I need to be a certain way in order to make it in the world. So that was, and then again, this was, my father's on this list as well as my sister. Just being able to just live your life and not really think that you need to do anything other than what you were put on earth to be. Sorry, and this was quite funny. I took my kids to Washington, and it occurred to me that when I got home, because I'd made all of these photographs, that I would substitute Lincoln for this guy. And that's just, I took a calligraphy course and did the lettering behind him. And I was on an assignment on Bathurst Street, if anyone knows Toronto, to just document Bathurst Street. And he was sitting outside a retirement home, and I was just walking, and he saw my camera, and we never said a word. He's like, this is Sarah. And I thought, oh, well, you know, could I refuse him? No. And so and it turned out that he was letting me know, in the future, you're going to need this photograph. Yeah. And Sandra Bland, again, what had happened to Sandra Bland, but when I read the description of her from her family, I connected, because they said she always knew her rights, she always spoke up for herself. I connected because they said she always knew her rights, she always spoke up for herself, she was mouthy. And I thought, that could have been me. I mean, you know, I mean, you relate to that when, if you're stopped, you know your rights, but we know that that's not always the thing to do or be aware of, or just shut your mouth, really. So this is me just, again, trying to deal with this, the knowledge of what happened to her. So I sat down and I wrote her name over and over and over again. And it's, again, a meditative, and if you meditate, you know how great you feel after you 24 karat gold paint. I just thought I'd do her initials. And because it's in the States, and I tend to use red, white, and blue a lot. And because it was in the States, and I tend to use red, white, and blue a lot. Again, through my teachers who taught me to love the flag, to honor the flag. And they understood what all of that meant, and it wasn't about politics, it was about how wonderful they felt to be in this country and how lucky we all were to exercise our rights. So, oh God, I'm sorry. My husband gave me a camera, and I found myself walking around Baker Street, just looking for people on stoops, because my husband was a draft dodger. We had 48 hours to get out of the country, and so it was a rupture for me. And I found myself with my camera walking around looking for the familiar. And so the 70s and the early 80s, 15 years of photographs. And I just had these photographs. At, I guess, the mid-80s, I decided I had gotten tired of making photographs because I had a small business of portraits. I'd done assignments for Toronto Life. I'd done all of these things, and I was getting bored, and I thought, I'll go back to school. I had a friend who taught photography at York, and I said, I'll just do it because you learn what's happening that's new in university. So I asked him, could I just take some courses with him, really hang out and see what people are doing? And he said, sure. And then he went to the powers that be and said, no, she can't do that. She either enrolls or she doesn't. So I enrolled. And so it was just my love. And what ended up happening, the text on these prints, they're about 25 years apart from the photographs. So these photographs were all done in the early 70s. The prints were done in the 90s with the text. And somehow the text began rising to the surface once I learned printmaking. And then I realized why I had made these photographs in the first place. And that came together for me incredibly well. And shall I read them to you? This one says, when she said, you dirty little wench, that's misprint, it's wench. I ran home to look it up in the dictionary. And Janet Gardner was a great fascination for all of us because she had gotten her period. And also going around the corner would be so delicious in itself because we were forbidden to do so. And then I come to getting a residency at the Studio Museum. I'd gotten a residency in Paris. I came back to Toronto. Came back to Toronto and thought, I rented my house, and I thought I probably should go see my mother, stay in New York for a bit, and see my family because I hadn't seen them for a year, and because I was in Paris. And I called the Studio Museum. At that time, you put in slides and you put in a huge, expensive package to get residencies and grants and that. And so I, again, being mouthy, I called the Studio Museum with a snarky kind of thing and said, I gave you slides a year and a half ago, and I hadn't gotten them, and I'm only in New York for a little while, and I'd like my package back. So he said, what's your name again? And I told him, and he said, just a minute. And then he said, could I call you back? Exactly 12 minutes later, he called back. He said, are you still interested in being a resident? I went, no. I did. It took me a week to say yes, because, again, check your perspective. I couldn't turn my brain around to do this. Anyway, I finally said yes. I won't tell you, I have a friend who's an astrologer in New York, in Toronto, and I called her and I said, what should I do? She said, June, what are you calling me for? You're going to take it. Anyway, it turned out to be quite wonderful. I had 2 exhibitions there. The first one was for Martin Luther King's birthday earlier on, which I showed Whispering City and other flag pieces. And what ended up happening was I was living in Harlem, and it was quite traumatic for me. I was very surprised because I left in '68. This is '97, and the first piece I made was called Homecoming Home. And Studio Museum was in a bit of disarray, and so they sort of gave me the space, and I sat there and I was reading the Times all the time, and I had a roll of paper towels, and I just decided I needed to think about how I felt, and I had all of these emotions, and so I just collage newsprint on paper towels. So the piece is about 18 pieces of every emotion, from overwhelming, underwhelming, because I found that everything had changed and absolutely nothing had changed. And it was very schizophrenic for me. And when I decided, what was I going to do? You know, because of course you have to have an exhibition. I had my camera, and I had, again, I was a professional photographer, so, you know, I had taught myself to see in frames and that. And I decided that so I wouldn't editorialize what I was seeing, I decided every morning I would wake up and I would set my camera for a certain distance, a certain aperture, and I held it at my hip, just trying to make sure I wasn't doing something that would put a spin on what I was seeing. I wanted because once I got the images, I had no idea what I had. I would just go around like this and snap. And it was very exciting. And when you see something at eye level, I didn't put my eye to the camera, I just do that. Just because I wanted to discover where I had landed. And then I got the idea that it would be good to do like decals and put them on fabric. And there was a Goodwill store up the street from the Harlem Museum. So I went in and I bought fabric I bought clothes by the pound and just took them back and began cutting them up. And then I thought, oh my God. I said, I'm cutting a perfectly good clothes people can use. And the curator came to me and she said, June, you bought this clothing. They don't care. You gave them your money. So just keep going. And so that's what I did. My mother comes to the exhibition. Take your parents to just put you down there. And she said, that's not a quilt. Anyway, it was seen by so many people in Harlem, and so many people thanked me, and people would go and try and figure out where images were and what I did inside, outside, subway, whatever, and they absolutely loved it. They kept bringing their friends back, and I connected with people I'd gone to school with because they wrote about it, and they all came, and that was a really wonderful, wonderful time for me at the Studio Museum. It was a really, really good experience for me. Any questions? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Hundreds and hundreds of photographs I made. And this is really iron on fabric. Is that it? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
We have a microphone.
Maybe I'll start out with a couple of questions. June, do you want to join me down there? Would you like to stay up there? Just a tiny bit of
Keep this in case you want to see something.
So really, this is like one of my first opportunities to ask you a couple of things. The burning question we receive about Harlem Quilt is, how did you transfer these amazing images onto the fabric? What was the process like for you technically, but also because you're dealing with such a personal subject matter, you're recalling so much, what was it like to almost relive the experience?
Well, as I say, I had no idea what the images would be until I developed them. And I was just very, very excited and I also learned how to do photo transfer. And there was a guy downtown, I don't know, Delancey Street. I was on Delancey Street forever with the electrical, with the transfer. Delancey Street's a great place. You gotta go there. I don't know if it still is, but anyway.
How did you, because you moved through your practice in a very intuitive way, you told me that the works you make, they need to be made. So because your practice spans anything from printmaking to collage to sculpture, how did you know that Harlem Quilt will take on this type of a life and material manifestation?
I had no idea.
Okay.
It was something I needed to do, and also I was filling my obligation to the Studio Museum to do, actually, it was the largest installation of the, because as you probably know, there are 3 artists in every year. And they built, like you did, a room for me. And it is amazing because often my ideas come rising to the surface at 2 a.m. And I think, oh, maybe that might be a really good idea. And so that's how it happened.
One other thing, actually, when I was earlier on writing just didactics and just information about June's work, one thing she corrected me about, I mean, there were many things, as you should, but one of them that stood out to me, you really emphasized the difference between picture taking and picture making. And that really stood out to me.
When I went to Canada, as I say, I started with photography, and I found a group of women who were all like-minded women, and we were all ex-Americans, having followed men to and photography at that time, we were not allowed. Are you ready for this? Women were not allowed in the dark room at University of Toronto. In the 70s. We were not allowed. We weren't allowed to take the courses. So there was a woman who was from Washington. She had a gallery, and she had 2 dark rooms in the basement of the gallery, and we taught ourselves photography. We taught ourselves the zone system, etc. And when we photography was really, we wanted to do it such that we didn't crop. We wanted to really see and teach ourselves to see. And that's how it all occurred.
I mean, you're being so humble about that. Because what you gave to just photographers and women of color at that time, the tools you gave them.
Part of it, the tools and the language.
That's right.
The language of photography, we just said we wouldn't do it. Shooting, grabbing, taking, all of those very masculine words of how you make a photograph. And I just tend not to use that, you know, because I make a photograph, we're making that together, you know. And I don't feel I'm taking from you, or I'm shooting you, or I just can't use those words to describe what I do.
Maybe one last question for me. Again, something you were saying earlier about how you make works for yourself, and when you had check or perspective on, it actually says check your perspective, so we are to understand it's your perspective. But then there are the works such as Sandra Bland and especially question mark, but you're listing all these amazing individuals, and really I feel like you are speaking then to us, to your audience. So how do you negotiate that?
Well, you see, I don't negotiate that. And as I say, when I taught, I always said to my students, you have got to learn the visual language, okay? You can't walk around the rest of your life holding your piece and trying to explain it to people. So when I do something, I really do it for myself. I needed to do the Sandra Bland. It wasn't about me thinking that it was going to be shown or seen. Daniel comes in and he says, oh, this is really nice, or something like that. And I'm surprised often by what. I was surprised that he asked me where was the Harlem Quilt, because it was in boxes. I've done it. That's the other thing. Once it's done, it's done. It's out there. It's not for me anymore. I've done my emotional work through making.
Well,
And I hope that it does speak to you, but I'm not really, you're not in my mind when I'm sitting there trying to deal with how I feel about Santa Blanc.
Well, we're so glad.
Department, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
We're so glad that, again, that Daniel brought out that piece from, can I say the word basement comes up a lot when I talk to June, because apparently that's where a lot of work lives. And not only are we lucky to see Harlem Quilt, but also in the future, Canada will be graced with more of June's work. And I'll share more announcements on a later date. But for now, I thought we'll open the floor to all of you. Are there any questions?
Yes, I have several actually about the quilt. It's just amazing. I mean, you have to see it. So, why did you decide to put that on fabric? When I went in there, I was trying to actually, first of all, you're overwhelmed by the totality of it. And then I was actually trying to see the pictures, which are difficult sometimes in some of the fabrics. But why did you decide fabric? Did you create the idea of how it's displayed with the light bulbs and
Yes.
that kind of thing? And why did you decide fabric versus just,
Again, it's going into the Goodwill. Who donates to Goodwill? The people in the community. The people, I'm sure people came in and said, that's my shirt. and it just seemed the right thing to do. Why would I go out and maybe put it on canvas? And then that's just a photography show on canvas. But I needed the community around me and feel the warmth. Again, that whole thing of bringing up 2191 8th Avenue and trying to remember how I felt as a kid with all of these people who were in my corner. Did you come up with the bulbs and everything? Oh, yes. Yes. I just have one more thing.
did you start off with the number? I mean, there's what,
Oh, no.
300? Did it just keep going? 'Cause
Just kept going.
I'm wondering, what you said you wanted to discover where you had landed when you returned to Harlem. So where did you land? Or what, can you articulate
Well,
that?
as I say, the streets were familiar, my family still lived there, but I don't know if you are aware of when that was. Clinton had just made a big deal about opening an office on 125th Street, and who's the guy, the basketball player who he had a whole strip that he bought up. Yes, that's right.
Andrew Johnson.
And, yeah, and it was changing so. It was changing, but again, it hadn't changed. The same people I knew lived there. They were, again, I should also point out that as a kid, it was an amazing place. But I'm not so naive to say that the adults didn't have strife. I'm sure that they did, but we as kids weren't really privy to that until we were older. But yes, you know, some of the same stores were there. I was just trying to navigate it and digest what was going on.
I'm going to paraphrase you, June.
Thank
But
you.
you just said, and you can correct me, about you do these projects like this one for yourself, and then once you're finished, it's out there,
It belongs to you.
and it belongs to us, and you're finished with it. Now, you're going through a whole different experience, because now you're seeing your work being responded to by us. And it's out there now, and you're still part of it.
Yes.
And I'd love to know if you probably don't know what you're going to do, but your reaction to all of this is
Well, I'll tell you, yesterday we were walking around the museum and the docents, I felt weepy after a while because they were all so kind and said how much it meant to them and their experience of the room. And it was very emotional for me because it's an important, I don't want, it's not a shrine to Harlem, but it's my love letter to Harlem. And it's amazing that other people can get it and bring me back to 1997 and say, I understand, I feel what you feel.
Anyone back here?
My name's Olston. Your work strikes me so much, and when you speak, you talk of this discovery element in your process and in your own self-discovery, and that's something that resonates with me really deeply. And so I'm curious, as an artist and as a human being, what you feel the role of discovery is, not only in your creative practice, but in the discovery of self.
One of my mother's directives was learn something new every single day. The other one was don't postpone joy. And so that's what I live by. And it is always, even at my age, it's a revelation to discover things about yourself. Be surprised at someone else's reaction that's different to your reaction of something. Hey. So that's really, and I'm probably continue because I'm still learning about me and about you and and the world.
Thank you.
I think we have time for just one more.
Thank you. It's been an absolute privilege to hear you talk today, especially about creative practice. It's resonated with me as well. My friend Pat brought me here, so I'm very grateful. If you're willing to share, could you maybe share with us a creative project that you're excited about right now, that you're personally working through, or that you are excited to maybe get to? It might not be right now currently, but something that's been really making you very excited around creativity.
I've done work on my dad and my sisters and whatnot, and I've taken a long time. I have to do something on my mother, but I haven't done it. Partly, I say my dad's wonderful. My mother was a taskmaster, and between you and me, my mother should never have gotten married because she was an artist. And so I'm very grateful for her bringing me up, and I'm still trying to figure her out.
Your sayings in my head. Put them on paper.
So I don't know how that will come about, whether it's going to be a print or a sculpture or whatever.
It's
But
going to be
have-
fantastic.
I hope so. Another, this is my grandmother, from your mouth to God's ears.
June, thank you so much for your openness. For your work, for just your honesty. This has been such a meaningful experience. Thank you for making this possible. Thank you to Daniel Faria. Thank you to everyone for being here. Again, the exhibition is open right now. It's up until March 26th. Please stop by, please see it.
Thank you.
For coming.